Unit 4, Section A, Exercises 3 and 4.
We're talking about time today, and joining me in the studio is Professor Arthur Richards, who is the curator of a new exhibition at the Science Museum on the history of timekeeping. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you for having me today.
Let's start off by talking about some of the earliest methods humans used to tell the time.
The earliest devices work by using the shadows cast by objects to tell the time, and would have been used by humans for millennia. But it was the Egyptians who introduced the first sundial, as we know it today, which uses a shadow cast onto a flat surface with points marked on it to indicate the time. While adjustments need to be made for the time of year, these early clocks were accurate to 1 or 2 minutes.
Quite amazing. What other early devices were there?
There are some very simple devices that were used to mark passages of time. These include early water clocks, which show how long it takes for water to fill or empty from a vessel. Interestingly, water clocks often used sundials to calibrate them. So, for example, one vessel of water measured 1 hour of time.
I see.
Later on, in the early Middle Ages, candle clocks appeared. They marked time by how long it took a candle to burn, and were quite successful. However, these clocks were not reusable, and wax was very expensive. So it was quite wasteful to use it to keep time.
So what happened next?
Well, the next major development probably didn't happen for a few centuries. In fact, the device wasn't seen in Europe until around the 11th century. It used sand instead of water or a candle, and it was, of course, the hourglass. It provided a fairly accurate way to measure passages of time and was entirely reusable.
But still, these devices don't tell the time, do they?
No, they don't. Mechanical clocks began to do this in the 12th and 13th century. And around this time, clock towers were first seen as well. But interestingly, to begin with, these clocks didn't have a face. Back in the 13th century, it wasn't necessary for most people to actually know what time it was. Instead, they used bells to notify people of the timing of events and religious services.
When did clock faces first appear?
Decades later, in the 14th century, although for over 200 years there was only an hour hand on the clock. You see, clocks weren't accurate enough to show more precise measurements.
What changed?
That would be the invention of the pendulum clock in 1656. These clocks were significantly more accurate, and in around 1690, clock faces began to show a minute hand.
Which brings us to the clocks we recognise today.
Yes, indeed. In 1927, one of the most important developments happened. Until that time, mechanical clocks were the most accurate and most popular. But they were expensive and required many moving parts and careful engineering. But then, scientists in the USA built the first quartz clock.
What was different?
Quartz clocks are not mechanical. They send electricity through a quartz crystal, which vibrates at a certain frequency. A digital counter then counts these vibrations and uses this to tell the time. The technology was cheap, easy to make, very accurate, and soon quartz clocks and watches were everywhere.
And are these still the most accurate clocks?
No, a new technology developed earlier this century has taken that prize, the atomic clock. But although atomic clocks are used to keep national and international standards of time, and almost never lose or gain time, they are so expensive that it is unlikely that we'll be wearing atomic watches anytime soon. And with smartphones, we don't really need anything that precise.